Hello and welcome to part three of Explorers, First Contact, and Rivalries Guided Notes. This session, we're going to take a look at how Spain's dominance over all the countries of Europe started to come to an end in the late 1500s and then continued throughout the 1600s. Now, here's where we are in your guided notes. We are at the end of page 5, going into page 6. And here's the story. At a certain point in the 1580s, after decades of plotting and spying and assassination attempts and the creation of the Church of England, Spain finally had had enough. During that period, from when Henry was king in the 1530s to the 1580s, there was assassination attempt after assassination attempt. There was persecution in England of the Church of England people if there was a Catholic king, and of the Catholic people if there was a Church of England king. There was outside interference by other monarchies in Europe that were either Catholic or Protestant. And finally, Spain had had enough. And by the 1580s, they decided it was their time to take care of England once and for all. And they decided to invade and make England their subjects. And so in 1588, in July of 1588, they sent the Spanish Armada, which was hundreds of Spanish warships and over 10,000 troops to surround England and to invade. And so you can see here on this map, here's Spain in red, and England is just this country right here. So it's not too far away. And since England's like an island, since the United Kingdom is an island, they just surrounded like the southern half with their ships, and then they began to find places where they could land, and they were going to invade. And it looked very, very bad for England. Now, England's defense, was horrible. They didn't have a defense. They didn't have very many warships. They didn't have the navy that Spain had. They hadn't built up 100 years of exploration. They hadn't stolen a bunch of native gold in order to build all these massive warships with these huge cannons. And so all it had was a few warships that had managed to put together and a bunch of fishing boats. Now, the people who sailed for England that day, when the Spanish Armada pulled up on the horizon and England had heard they were going to come that day, they knew they were probably going to die, but they sailed anyway to protect their families and their country from the Spanish Inquisition. I mean, they knew that the alternative was probably death and torture for anybody who wanted to remain Church of England, and some of it just for fun, just for spite, because England had been such a pain to Spain for so long. The best plan England had, the best chance they had, was hatched by a hated enemy of the Spanish, who was a guy named Sir Francis Drake. Now, this is Sir Francis Drake here. Drake was a privateer, which is basically like a royal pirate. And Queen Elizabeth had given him the blessing to really just go forth and jack with the Spanish. That's his whole mission. And so he had done that. He had been all over North and South America, landing in Spanish ports, stealing things, blowing things up. I mean, he really was like a royal pirate for England to mess with Spain. And so people respected him. They called him Drake. They called him Drake the Dragon, Draco the Dragon. And he was one of Queen Elizabeth's most trusted subjects. And so when he spoke, people listened. And so he said, come on, everybody, I have an idea. Don't lose hope. I've got an idea. And he brings everybody in. He's like, here's what we're going to do. First, get all our little boats together. And then we sail as fast as we can. They're slow. We're fast. We sail as fast as we can right at the Spanish ships. And everybody's like, yeah, I'll be honest with you there, Drake. That doesn't sound like such a smart idea, because they're big and have lots of cannons, and we are tiny and we'll get blown out of the water. And he's like, yeah, but it gets better. Don't worry about that, because as soon as you get close to them, you're going to light your boat on fire and then ram them. And all of the English sea captains look at him like he's crazy, because it kind of is crazy. Because the one place you don't want to be is a boat that's on fire in the middle of an ocean. It's a bad idea. Nobody wins in that scenario. But people did see some of the wisdom. If the one thing they've got is that they're a little bit faster than the Spanish, maybe this will work. They certainly don't have enough cannons to fight them. They certainly don't have enough cannons to blow the Spanish out of the water, but maybe they can sail up close enough to them and the Spanish won't see it coming. And so, did it work? Well, kind of at first. The Spanish were certainly surprised. And here is a picture. You can find more, but here's a famous painting of the assault of the English fishing boats on fire on the giant Spanish Armada. The Spanish were surprised at first, but by midday, they had adjusted and probably would have defeated the English. When all of a sudden, a giant storm blew in from the north and sunk most of the Spanish Armada, battering their ships against the rocks. A lot of the English boats were sunk too, but they're just fishing boats of no consequence, or the fishermen were able to get their boats out of the water because they know the waters there around England, and the Spanish don't. And it takes a lot bigger, a lot deeper port to put a Spanish warship in than it does a small fishing vessel. And so a lot of these boats, over half the Spanish Armada that day was sunk. And to this day, the English still say that the hand of God must have brought that storm to save them. And so we call this event the defeat of the Spanish Armada, which happened in 1588 when Spain lost a lot of its fleet and soldiers in an assault on England. From this point on, what we see is that Spain begins to decline. Eventually, they're no longer top dog. They're still dangerous. They're still not to be trifled with. They're even half their navy that survived this assault on England is still way more than just about all the other countries on earth put together. But they're going to be weakened just enough that it's going to free other countries like England and France to explore. And when they do explore, when they finally get to, which doesn't really start until the very late 1500s and early 1600s, what they're looking for is something called the Northwest Passage. The Northwest Passage, the idea of it, is an all-water route to the Indies through North America. They've gone around North America by this point. A guy named Ferdinand Magellan had circled the whole earth by boat and had gone south, had gone west like Columbus, and then south around South America and across the Pacific Ocean and through between Australia and Asia, and then around Africa and back to. But in his whole crew, only like 12 people survived, and he didn't. And so nobody really wanted to do that. And so they're looking for an all-water route through North America so that you don't have to go around South America. Here's the problem. First, they still need to avoid Spain, who is very much stronger than them still. And second, the Northwest Passage doesn't really exist. Here's a look. So here's what they're trying to do. Here's a visual. They are trying all these countries, and I mean Spain and Portugal still looked for it too, but not to the extent that England and France are going to look for it. This is the idea that you could have an all-water route, this Northwest Passage, through North America and over to the Indies. It doesn't actually exist. You can sail down the St. Lawrence River and you get to the Great Lakes, but then there's nothing that goes further. You can even, later on, they found out, and through the Lewis and Clark expedition 200 years later, that you can go up the Mississippi to about St. Louis, and then you take the Missouri River all the way over, way up into the Rockies, but it gets to within about 100 miles at the Continental Divide of another river, the Columbia River and the Snake River, that head down south and then eventually empty into the Pacific Ocean. It never actually connects. There is no Northwest Passage. But they look for it. They look for it forever. And that's what England and France are constantly looking for. But again, here's the thing. Remember the whole Treaty of Tordesillas and how Portugal just blindly accepted that it could only get this little chunk of land and that Spain would get the rest of it. They did that because they didn't know everything that was over here. And Spain didn't know everything that was over here then. And Spain still, by 1610, even though they've explored all this and claimed all this is New Spain, they still don't know everything that's over here. And much less England and France. They don't know how big North America is. And so everybody's pretty ignorant of just exactly how big things are. And so they keep looking for this thing called the Northwest. And just remember, they're looking for the Northwest Passage because, again, these countries are trying to find a way to get to the Indies Good Mall and then load up their boats with stuff to take back to England and to take back to Europe and sell in the markets of Europe for fat cash. They're trying to get to the good mall, to go back to their neighborhoods and make ridiculous money on it. The problem is it's just really hard to get over there. And Portugal's got a way where it sails around Africa, but for everybody else, it's tough to get there. They eventually do. And different countries establish different trading places over here in the Indies. But especially in the early part, it is not an easy thing. And for a while, they're content just to explore North and South America, at least these countries, and see what they can find here.